Picture your mind as a busy machine, always working to help you make decisions. Some choices happen instantly, like smiling back at someone who greets you. Others take more effort, like deciding which car to buy or how to solve a challenging problem. In Thinking Fast and Slow, Daniel Kahneman invites you to explore how your brain manages these decisions and why it sometimes surprises you. You'll discover two key ways your mind works. One part is quick and instinctive, jumping to conclusions without much thought. The other part is slower and more careful, taking its time to analyze before deciding. These two systems shape everything you do, but they don't always work perfectly together. Kahneman explains how these systems often rely on mental shortcuts. While these shortcuts can save time, they can also lead to errors like misjudging risks, being overconfident, or making decisions based on emotions instead of logic. This book will help you see the patterns behind your thinking. It will show you where your mind shines and where it might trick you. Without further wasting time, let's dive in. Part 1, Two Systems. The characters of the story. Your mind has two powerful systems working behind the scenes, System 1 and System 2. These systems are like two characters with distinct roles in how you think and make decisions. System 1 is your quick thinker. It's fast, automatic, and instinctive. It operates without effort, handling tasks like recognizing a familiar face, understanding simple sentences, or reacting to danger. This system is always active, scanning your surroundings and making snap judgments based on past experiences and patterns. For example, if someone throws a ball at you, System 1 makes you duck before you even think about it. System 2, on the other hand, is your slow and deliberate thinker. It engages when tasks require focus and effort. This system helps you solve problems, plan, and analyze situations. For instance, when you multiply 27 by 14 or decide which university to attend, System 2 takes over. However, it works much slower than System 1 and requires energy, so you can't rely on it for everything. While these two systems work together, they don't always align perfectly. System 1 is efficient but prone to mistakes when faced with complex situations. It often relies on shortcuts, which can lead to errors. System 2 is more accurate but tends to be lazy, stepping in only when it's absolutely necessary. Understanding these two characters is essential to recognizing how your brain operates. They shape your thoughts, choices, and actions in every moment of your life. Knowing when to trust them and when to question them can help you make better decisions and avoid common mental pitfalls. 2. Attention and effort. Your ability to focus and pay attention is a powerful tool, but it requires significant mental effort. System 2, the slower and more deliberate thinker, is responsible for tasks that need concentration, such as solving a tricky problem, making a big decision, or learning something new. However, using System 2 comes with a cost. It's mentally exhausting and can only handle a limited amount of work at a time. Think of your attention like a battery. The more energy you use to concentrate on a task, the less energy remains for other activities. This is why prolonged focus can leave you feeling tired, frustrated, or unable to make clear decisions later. System 1, in contrast, doesn't demand much energy. It handles automatic and routine tasks such as identifying familiar objects, interpreting simple emotions, or reacting to immediate dangers. This allows you to conserve mental energy for when System 2 is truly needed. However, there's a trade-off. When System 2 is overwhelmed, distracted, or fatigued, System 1 often steps in, even for situations where careful thought is essential. While System 1 is fast and efficient, it relies on shortcuts and patterns that can lead to errors in more complex or unfamiliar situations. For instance, imagine you're at a party trying to have a deep conversation while loud music plays in the background. Your System 2 works hard to focus on the conversation and filter out distractions. If someone suddenly asks you a question unrelated to the topic, you might respond without much thought, relying on System 1. The response may be quick, but it's not always the most accurate or thoughtful. Understanding the limits of attention and the effort it requires can help you manage your mental energy better. Prioritizing important tasks, avoiding unnecessary distractions, and taking breaks can keep System 2 ready for action. Recognizing when your attention is stretched thin allows you to step back and avoid decisions made on autopilot. 3. The lazy controller. System 2, though capable of complex thinking, has a tendency to be lazy. It doesn't like to work harder than necessary, preferring to rely on the quicker, easier System 1 whenever it can. This is where the lazy controller comes into play. System two's reluctance to engage unless absolutely required. This laziness is natural. The brain is designed to conserve energy, and engaging System 2 requires effort. It's far easier for your mind to follow automatic patterns and make quick decisions, even when it should slow down and think carefully. This is why, in many situations, we end up trusting our first impressions or instincts, even though they may not always be accurate or the best approach. For example, you might quickly judge someone as untrustworthy based on a gut feeling or assume that a product is of good quality simply because it's expensive. System 1 takes these shortcuts, but System 2 would step in to challenge these assumptions if it weren't so lazy. System 2 would look deeper, consider the evidence, and make a more informed decision. But this takes effort, and the brain tries to avoid it. This laziness can be problematic, especially when faced with important decisions. When System 2 doesn't engage, errors can occur. You might make snap judgments, fall for biases, or miss critical information. For example, when making financial decisions, your quick judgments might overlook important risks, and relying on System 1 might lead to poor outcomes. Becoming aware of this tendency can help you avoid falling into its trap. By recognizing when System 2 is being lazy, you can consciously push yourself to slow down, think critically, and make more informed choices. This shift can lead to more thoughtful and accurate decision making, reducing the chances of errors caused by relying too heavily on automatic thinking. 4. The associative machine. Your brain is constantly making links between ideas, memories, and experiences. This is the work of System 1, which operates like an associative machine. It automatically connects new information to what you already know, allowing you to quickly make sense of the world without needing to think deeply. For example, when you see a dog wagging its tail, your brain immediately associates that with happiness or friendliness. Similarly, when you hear a siren, you might instinctively think about an emergency or danger. These associations are instant, happening so quickly that you don't even notice them. System 1 is constantly creating these connections to help you navigate daily life. The associative machine is powerful because it helps you react quickly and efficiently. It allows you to recognize patterns, make judgments, and act based on past experiences without having to consciously analyze everything. For example, if you've been in a car accident before, your brain might automatically associate the sound of screeching tires with a feeling of danger, prompting you to pay attention. However, this automatic linking of ideas can also lead to mistakes. Because System 1 relies on past experiences and patterns, it sometimes makes faulty connections that may not be accurate in the current situation. For instance, if you've had a bad experience with a particular food, your brain might automatically link that food with a sense of disgust, even if it's safe to eat now. Similarly, stereotypes can form through the associative machine, where your brain unfairly links certain traits to a group of people based on limited experiences or biased information. Recognizing the role of the associative machine is crucial because it helps you understand how your mind is constantly forming connections. By being aware of these automatic associations, you can step back and assess whether they are based on solid evidence or if they're influenced by biases. This awareness allows you to make more thoughtful and accurate decisions, preventing errors that arise from relying too heavily on automatic, unexamined connections. 5. Cognitive ease. Cognitive ease refers to how easy or comfortable it feels to process information. When something is easy to understand or familiar, it feels effortless and your brain experiences a sense of ease. This is the work of System 1, which thrives on simplicity and familiarity. The more familiar a task or piece of information is, the less effort you need to put in, and the more comfortable you feel. For example, reading a sentence in your native language or recognizing a well-known brand logo doesn't require much mental effort. Your brain can process these things quickly and smoothly, leading to feelings of comfort and ease. This is why you often feel good when you are in a familiar environment, like at home, because your brain is operating in a state of cognitive ease. However, cognitive ease can also trick you. The easier something feels, the more likely you are to trust it, even if it isn't necessarily true. When information is presented in a clear, simple way, you're more likely to believe it because it's easy to process. This is why advertisers, for example, often use familiar, comforting images or simple language. They make the information seem trustworthy without requiring much thought. On the other hand, when information is difficult to understand or when you face unfamiliar challenges, you experience cognitive strain. This strain signals your brain that it needs to engage System 2, the slower, more thoughtful system. However, System 2 requires more effort and can be tiring, which is why we tend to avoid situations that demand this kind of mental work. Being aware of cognitive ease helps you recognize when your brain might be relying on shortcuts or making judgments without enough critical thinking. By understanding this concept, you can train yourself to slow down and question information that seems too easy or comfortable, ensuring that you don't fall for misleading or incorrect conclusions. 6. Norms, surprises, and causes. Your brain is constantly trying to make sense of the world by comparing what's happening around you to what's normal or expected. This helps you predict what's likely to occur and react quickly when things are different. When something falls within the norm, it doesn't require much thought. But when something surprises you, something that doesn't fit your expectations, your brain has to work harder to understand what's going on. Norms are the patterns or expectations you have based on past experiences. For example, you expect people to greet each other with a handshake or smile when they meet. When things follow these norms, your mind processes them easily and everything feels smooth. System 1 is in control here, making fast, automatic decisions based on these familiar patterns. However, surprises are a different story. When something unexpected happens, whether it's a change in routine, an unusual event, or an unexpected outcome, your brain is forced to pause and reassess the situation. Surprises trigger System 2, which requires more mental effort to understand why something happened or to adjust your expectations. For instance, if someone suddenly behaves in a way that breaks social norms, like interrupting a conversation, your mind might be momentarily confused before processing why it happened. Understanding causes is another important part of how your brain works. When something unusual happens, your mind seeks to find the cause. It's natural to want to understand why things are the way they are. However, this search for causality can sometimes lead to errors. You might create connections that aren't really there, such as believing that two events are linked because they happened close together, even if they're unrelated. This is a common way that biases and misunderstandings form. The brain often falls back on the search for causes because it wants to reduce uncertainty. It's much more comfortable when things make sense and fit into your worldview. But when things don't seem to fit the norm or don't have a clear cause, your brain feels uncomfortable, and System 2 steps in to analyze and solve the puzzle. Recognizing how your mind handles norms, surprises, and causes helps you understand how judgments and decisions are made. It also shows you how easily your brain can make mistakes when it's searching for a cause where none exists, or when it over relies on patterns instead of questioning new information. Being aware of these tendencies can help you think more critically, especially when faced with surprising or unfamiliar situations. 7. A machine for jumping to conclusions. Your mind is built to make quick judgments and decisions, often without taking the time to gather all the necessary information. This tendency is part of System 1, the fast thinking system. While it allows you to react quickly and efficiently in many situations, it can also lead to jumping to conclusions, where your mind forms judgments before you have enough evidence to back them up. For example, imagine you meet someone at a party, and within minutes, you've already decided whether you like them or not. You might judge them based on their clothing, body language, or a few things they say. Similarly, if you hear a piece of gossip, your immediate response might be to believe it, even without verifying the details. These quick conclusions are automatic and efficient, but they often lack the depth or accuracy that a more careful assessment might offer. This behavior is part of a mental process called cognitive biases, which are shortcuts your brain uses to make decisions faster. However, these shortcuts can lead to errors, especially when they cause you to overlook important details or jump to conclusions too quickly. One of the most common biases is confirmation bias. where you unconsciously seek out information that supports your existing beliefs while ignoring information that challenges them. For example, if you believe a certain political view is correct, you might focus on articles or opinions that confirm that belief, dismissing anything that disagrees with it. Another common bias is the availability heuristic. This bias leads you to judge the likelihood of an event based on how easily examples come to mind. For instance, after hearing about a plane crash on the news, you might start to believe flying is dangerous, even though statistically, air travel is one of the safest ways to get around. The fact that the crash was recent and memorable makes it feel more likely, even though other data shows it's not. These mental shortcuts, while efficient, can also cause you to misjudge situations and make errors in your thinking. By relying too much on System 1's speed and automatic reactions, you risk oversimplifying complex problems or making snap judgments that aren't backed by all the facts. To avoid these pitfalls, it's important to be aware of when you're jumping to conclusions. Slowing down and giving yourself time to consider the situation more thoroughly can help you engage System 2, the slower, more thoughtful system that analyzes information more deeply. By questioning your initial assumptions and examining the evidence more carefully, you can make more informed, accurate decisions. Recognizing when you're relying too heavily on mental shortcuts allows you to pause, reflect, and choose a more reasoned approach rather than acting on impulse. 8. How judgments happen. Judgments are the decisions your brain makes about people, situations, or events, often based on limited information. These decisions happen automatically and quickly, thanks to System 1, which processes information based on patterns, emotions, and past experiences. While this system is efficient, it doesn't always lead to accurate conclusions. For example, when you meet someone new, you might quickly judge their personality based on their appearance, body language, or tone of voice. Your brain makes these judgments almost instantly, relying on previous experiences and stereotypes to fill in the gaps. You might assume someone is friendly because they smile or appear approachable. This is an example of how judgments are often formed without deep thought. These judgments can be influenced by biases, which are mental shortcuts that your brain uses to make decisions faster. One common bias is anchoring, where your initial impression or piece of information shapes how you interpret everything that follows. If you're told that a product is expensive, you might judge it as high quality, even if the product doesn't live up to expectations. The first piece of information acts as an anchor, affecting your judgment of everything that comes after. Another bias is substitution, which happens when your brain replaces a difficult question with an easier one. For instance, if you're asked about the quality of a new car but you're not sure, your mind might substitute the difficult question, is it a good car, with an easier one, do I like the way it looks? This happens automatically, and you may not even realize you've done it. Your judgments also happen in the context of what's available to you at the moment. If you're in a hurry, tired, or distracted, your mind may rely more heavily on System 1 and make quick, instinctive judgments that might not be as accurate. On the other hand, if you have more time and energy, System 2 can engage, allowing you to think more deeply and make more reasoned decisions. Being aware of how judgments are formed can help you avoid making snap decisions based on incomplete information or biases. By taking the time to question your assumptions and considering the situation from multiple perspectives, you can make more accurate and thoughtful judgments. 9. Answering an easier question. When you're faced with a difficult question, your brain often quickly substitutes it with an easier one. You don't even realize this is happening. The answer to the simpler question may feel just as reasonable as the more complex one, but it's not always as accurate. This mental shortcut helps your brain save time and effort, but it can sometimes lead to poor decisions. For example, if someone asks whether you like your job and you're unsure, instead of thinking about the whole picture, your brain might focus on something simpler, like whether you get along with your colleagues. Your mind answers the simpler question, which might influence your overall judgment, but it doesn't reflect your full opinion about your job. This automatic switch is called substitution. When you face a hard or vague question, your brain often replaces it with a question that's easier to answer. This makes it easier to make decisions, but it doesn't always lead to the right answer. For instance, if you're asked about climate change, instead of thinking about the complex scientific details, you might rely on easier clues, like recent weather events or popular opinions. This can affect your judgment by leading you to conclusions based on what's familiar or easily accessible, not necessarily the full picture. While this shortcut can be helpful when you need a quick answer, it can also result in mistakes. By recognizing when your brain is substituting a harder question with an easier one, you can take a moment to slow down, use more effortful thinking, system two, and make a more thoughtful and informed decision. Part 2, Heuristics and Biases 10. The Law of Small Numbers. The law of small numbers refers to the tendency to overestimate the reliability of conclusions drawn from small samples of data. People often make the mistake of assuming that a small sample is as representative of the larger population as a larger one. This is because our brains are wired to look for patterns and make decisions quickly, but small samples can lead to inaccurate conclusions. For example, imagine flipping a coin just 5 times and getting heads every time. You might conclude that the coin is biased, even though statistically, the probability of getting heads 5 times in a row is not that unusual. If you were to flip the coin 100 times, the result would likely be much closer to an even split between heads and tails. But your brain, relying on the small sample, might incorrectly judge the fairness of the coin. This bias can have a significant impact in various situations. People tend to generalize from small, unrepresentative samples, thinking that their limited experience is enough to make conclusions about something much larger. For example, if someone has only had a few positive experiences with a particular restaurant, they might assume all future experiences will be the same. This belief might not hold true, as their sample size is too small to make an accurate prediction about the restaurant's overall quality. In medicine, the law of small numbers can be dangerous. If a small study shows promising results, people might take those results as conclusive evidence, even if the sample size is not large enough to be statistically significant. This can lead to overconfidence in treatments or interventions that might not be as effective when tested on a larger scale. The law of small numbers can also be seen in polling, where predictions based on small samples often misrepresent the opinions of the larger population. This can result in decisions based on faulty data, such as political predictions or business strategies that rely on skewed or incomplete data. Recognizing this bias is crucial in improving your decision-making process. By understanding that small samples are less reliable, you can slow down and consider whether more information is needed before jumping to conclusions. Larger, more representative samples provide a clearer and more accurate picture of reality, allowing for better informed decisions. 11. Anchoring effects. Anchoring is a cognitive bias that occurs when people rely too heavily on the first piece of information they receive, the anchor, to make decisions. Once an initial reference point is set, all subsequent judgments are often influenced by that anchor, even if it is irrelevant or arbitrary. For example, imagine you're shopping for a new jacket and see one priced at $500. Then you find another jacket priced at $200. Even though $200 is still quite expensive, the initial $500 price has anchored your perception of value, making the $200 jacket seem like a much better deal, even if it's still overpriced. Anchoring can occur in many areas of life, from shopping to negotiations to even medical diagnoses. In one famous experiment, participants were asked to estimate the percentage of African countries in the United Nations. Some were first shown a wheel of fortune that landed on the number 65, while others saw 10. The participants who saw the higher number were more likely to estimate a higher percentage of African countries, even though the anchor had no real connection to the actual figure. The effects of anchoring are particularly strong when people don't have enough information to make a fully informed decision. When uncertain, people are more likely to rely on the initial anchor rather than engage in a deeper, more thoughtful analysis. In negotiations, for example, the first offer made in a deal often serves as an anchor, shaping the final price. If the initial offer is high or low, it can influence both parties' expectations and outcomes, even if it's unreasonable. Understanding anchoring can help you recognize when you're being influenced by irrelevant information. In situations where you're making judgments or negotiating, try to resist letting the first number or piece of information set the tone for the entire decision making process. Taking a step back, considering the broader context, and engaging in a more thorough evaluation can help reduce the impact of anchoring and lead to more balanced decisions. 12. The science of availability. The availability heuristic is a mental shortcut that helps you make decisions based on the information that is most readily available in your memory. When you need to judge how likely something is to happen, you tend to rely on examples that quickly come to mind. If something can be easily recalled, whether it's because it's recent, emotional, or memorable, you might assume that it happens more frequently or is more likely to occur than it actually is. For instance, if you've recently heard about a plane crash on the news, you might start to believe that flying is more dangerous than it really is. The vivid memory of the crash, coupled with media coverage, makes the event seem more common and more likely, even though statistics show that air travel is far safer than driving. This is an example of the availability bias at work. The science behind this bias is rooted in how our brains store and retrieve information. Events or experiences that are more striking, dramatic, or emotional tend to be stored in memory more strongly. When you are asked to judge the likelihood of something, your brain draws upon these strong, memorable instances, making it harder to think logically or statistically. This can distort your perception of reality, causing you to overestimate risks or the frequency of certain events. For example, after hearing about several high profile cases of fraud, you might begin to believe that fraud is more common than it is. Similarly, if you see news stories about violent crimes in your area, your perception of safety might decrease, even if crime rates in your community are low. The availability heuristic can also affect your judgments in everyday life. If you often hear about the success of tech startups, you might believe that starting a tech company is easier and more likely to succeed, even though the majority of startups fail. Your perception is shaped by the information that's most available to you, rather than by a full understanding of the true probabilities involved. To counteract the availability heuristic, it's important to seek out objective data and facts, recognizing when you are relying on easily recalled information rather than on a broader and more balanced understanding can help you make more accurate judgments and decisions. This involves being aware of how emotions, media influence, and memorable experiences shape your perceptions. 13. Availability, emotion, and risk. The availability heuristic doesn't just affect how we judge the frequency of events, it also plays a significant role in how we perceive risks. When making decisions involving risk, the events that are most easily brought to mind, especially those that evoke strong emotions, are more likely to influence our judgments. Emotions amplify the availability effect. For instance, when people hear about natural disasters like earthquakes or hurricanes, the vivid images and emotional impact of those events make them seem more frequent and more dangerous than they actually are. Similarly, hearing about a rare but highly publicized event, like a shark attack, can cause people to overestimate the risk of such events happening to them. This emotional connection to information makes it difficult to objectively assess the true likelihood of a risk. When emotionally charged events dominate the media, they become easier to recall, and that availability distorts your judgment. As a result, you might avoid activities like swimming in the ocean or flying in an airplane, even though these risks are far less common than they feel in the moment. Your brain is wired to react to emotional information more strongly than neutral information. This can be helpful in situations where quick, emotional decisions are necessary for survival, like avoiding a potential danger. However, in modern life, where emotional responses to media and news events can distort your perception of risk, this bias can lead to irrational decision making. For example, after a high profile terrorist attack, people may feel a heightened sense of danger in their own lives, despite the statistical unlikeliness of such an event happening to them. Similarly, the fear of flying after hearing about a crash, even though air travel is one of the safest modes of transportation, is an example of the availability heuristic at play. The availability heuristic is further influenced by media, which often prioritizes dramatic, emotional stories that are more likely to capture attention and stir up fear. These stories become available in your mind and can skew your perception of risks. To combat this bias, it's important to seek a broader perspective by gathering more information, especially from reliable sources. Being mindful of how emotional reactions to news stories can shape your perceptions helps you evaluate risks more accurately and make better, more rational decisions. Understanding the role that availability, emotion, and risk play in your thinking can improve your ability to judge situations more objectively and avoid the irrational fears that can result from this bias. 14. Tom W. Specialty. Tom W. Specialty is an example of a bias that occurs when people rely on stereotypes or generalizations to make judgments, particularly in situations where they lack sufficient information. This heuristic, known as the representativeness heuristic, leads people to judge the likelihood of an event or person belonging to a certain category based on how similar they are to a prototype or stereotype, rather than on actual statistical evidence. For instance, imagine you're introduced to a man named Tom W., and you're told that he is a quiet, intellectual person who enjoys reading books about philosophy and the sciences. Based on this description alone, you might assume that Tom W. is more likely to be a professor at a university than a truck driver, simply because the description fits the stereotype of what a professor looks like. However, this judgment overlooks important statistical data, such as the fact that there are far more truck drivers than professors. This type of thinking happens because your brain makes quick decisions based on how closely someone or something matches an existing stereotype. When you meet someone new, your mind tries to fit them into a category, but this approach can lead to errors when the categories are based on insufficient or misleading information. The representativeness heuristic works by matching patterns in new experiences with known patterns in your memory, but these associations are often inaccurate. The error in this type of thinking is that it neglects base rates, statistical probabilities of different events. For example, even though Tom W. fits the intellectual stereotype, this does not change the fact that the majority of people with those characteristics may not be professors, but may belong to other professions that are more common. This heuristic is not only limited to judgments about individuals, but can also affect decisions in areas like gambling, health, and business. For example, when people are asked to guess the outcome of a coin toss, they might expect a head after a series of tails, even though the tosses are independent and each outcome has an equal probability. This belief is based on the incorrect assumption that the future event must balance out the past, which is a type of representativeness bias. By being aware of the representativeness heuristic, you can begin to question the assumptions that influence your judgments. Instead of jumping to conclusions based on stereotypes or patterns that seem to fit, taking the time to consider statistical information and base rates can lead to more accurate and thoughtful decisions. Recognizing when you're relying on superficial traits or narratives helps you make better informed judgments and avoid being misled by biases. 15. Linda. Less is more. The Linda problem is a classic example used to illustrate how people often make judgments based on how representative or vivid a scenario seems, rather than on the actual likelihood of an event. This problem highlights a cognitive bias known as conjunction fallacy, where people mistakenly believe that specific conditions are more probable than general ones. In the Linda problem, participants are presented with the following description of a woman named Linda. Linda is 31 years old, single, outspoken, and very bright. She majored in philosophy. As a student, she was deeply concerned with issues of discrimination and social justice, and also participated in anti-nuclear demonstrations. After reading this, participants are asked to choose which of the following two statements is more likely. 1. Linda is a bank teller. 2. Linda is a bank teller and is active in the feminist movement. Most people tend to choose the second option, even though it is statistically less likely. This happens because the second option involves a combination of two characteristics, Linda being a bank teller and being active in the feminist movement, which seems more representative of the description provided. People are swayed by how well the details of Linda's story match their stereotypes about feminist bank tellers. even though the second option requires more specific conditions to be true. This is an example of the representativeness heuristic, where people judge the probability of an event based on how similar it is to a stereotype or typical example, rather than on the actual likelihood. By combining two characteristics, bank teller and feminist, the second option seems more representative of Linda's description. But in reality, the first option, Linda being just a bank teller, is statistically more probable because it doesn't require the conjunction of two events. The Linda problem shows how we can be misled by our intuition. Our brains often focus on how well something fits with a narrative or stereotype, even when that doesn't align with the basic rules of probability. In this case, the conjunction fallacy happens when we mistakenly assume that specific details make an event more likely, even when a simpler explanation would suffice. To make more accurate decisions, it's important to recognize that the probability of two independent events happening together, such as being both a bank teller and a feminist, is always lower than the probability of just one event happening, being a bank teller alone. Being aware of this fallacy can help you avoid overestimating the likelihood of complex scenarios and lead to more rational decision making. 16. Causes trump statistics. This principle highlights a cognitive bias where people tend to favor causal explanations over statistical reasoning. In other words, when people are presented with a story or cause and effect explanation, they often ignore statistical probabilities and focus more on the narrative, which seems more convincing or intuitive. For example, imagine you read a news article about a man who starts a successful business after attending a motivational seminar. People may believe that attending the seminar was the cause of his success, even if statistical data shows that the seminar doesn't actually improve business outcomes. The story about the individual's success becomes more persuasive than statistical evidence because humans naturally gravitate towards simple, relatable causes. This bias arises from the way your brain processes information. Humans are wired to think in terms of causes and effects because it's easier to understand and more engaging than abstract statistics. Causal stories make sense of complex situations and provide a more straightforward explanation. However, this tendency to seek out causal relationships can lead to flawed reasoning. In many cases, the true reasons behind an event or outcome are not as simple as a single cause. Instead, statistical evidence and probabilities provide a more accurate picture, but they lack the emotional appeal and clarity of a good story. A common example of causes trumping statistics can be seen in health-related decisions. If a person hears a story about someone who developed cancer after using a particular brand of shampoo, they may overestimate the risk of that shampoo causing cancer, even if research shows there's no statistically significant link between the two. The emotional impact of the story leads them to ignore the broader statistical evidence. This bias can also affect decision-making in areas like policy, economics, and even personal life. When people are confronted with statistical data about the chances of certain events, they might dismiss it in favor of a personal or anecdotal story that seems more compelling. To avoid falling into this trap, it's important to recognize when a narrative or causal explanation is influencing your judgment. By focusing on statistical evidence, and probabilities, you can make more objective, informed decisions rather than being swayed by stories that may not reflect the full picture. Understanding this bias allows you to balance causal explanations with the broader, more reliable data that can lead to better outcomes. 17. Regression to the mean. Regression to the mean is a statistical phenomenon that occurs when extreme or unusual events tend to be followed by more typical or average ones. This principle explains why things that are very high or very low tend to return to normal or average levels over time. It's a concept that often gets overlooked in decision-making, leading people to make faulty conclusions about causes and effects. For example, imagine a student who performs exceptionally well on a test. Perhaps they were particularly lucky or well rested on that day. If this student consistently scores high on tests, others might assume that their high performance is due to their exceptional ability. However, according to the principle of regression to the mean, it's more likely that their performance will return to a more average level in future tests. simply because extreme performances are often temporary and do not represent the person's true abilities. This bias can also be seen in sports. If an athlete has an outstanding game, perhaps they hit an unusually high number of home runs or scored more points than usual, it's easy for coaches or fans to believe that the player is a superstar. However, extreme performances tend to be followed by more average performances because they are influenced by random factors, such as luck or environmental conditions. In the business world, companies that experience extraordinary success one year may see a drop in performance the next year, not because they did something wrong, but because success often fluctuates around an average over time. Similarly, companies that struggle one year may improve the following year, simply due to the fact that poor performances are often temporary and do not reflect a company's long term potential. The bias of regression to the mean is important because it affects how you interpret results and make predictions. People often fail to recognize that extreme outcomes are not always indicative of permanent trends. For example, if a child scores exceptionally well on a single math test, parents might mistakenly think their child has suddenly become a math genius. However, the child's performance will likely regress toward the mean, and future test scores will be closer to the average. Recognizing regression to the mean helps you avoid making overconfident predictions or drawing faulty conclusions from short term data. Instead of attributing changes to causes that may not exist, it's better to consider that extreme outcomes might simply be the result of randomness or temporary factors. This awareness can improve your decision making by encouraging a more realistic view of trends and patterns. 18. Taming intuitive predictions. Intuitive predictions are the judgments and forecasts you make based on your gut feelings or instinctive understanding of a situation, without carefully considering all the relevant data or probabilities. While intuition can be helpful in making quick decisions, it often leads to biases and errors, especially in complex or uncertain situations. This chapter explains how to manage and refine your intuitive predictions to make them more accurate. One common mistake in intuitive predictions is overconfidence. People often trust their instincts too much and believe they have a clearer understanding of future outcomes than they actually do. This can lead to overly optimistic predictions or underestimation of uncertainty. For instance, a person might predict that a business will continue growing at an exceptional rate because of a strong start, ignoring the natural fluctuations that businesses often experience. Intuitive predictions are also influenced by biases like the availability heuristic, where you base your judgments on the most easily recalled information, which is often not representative of the full picture. For example, if you remember a few successful entrepreneurs who achieved rapid success, you might predict that your own business will follow the same pattern, even though the average outcomes are much more varied. A key strategy to tame these intuitive predictions is to incorporate statistical reasoning and base rates into your thinking. Instead of relying solely on your gut feeling or what's most vivid in your memory, consider the broader statistical context. For example, rather than predicting success based on a few striking success stories, look at the average success rates in that field. This can provide a more grounded perspective, preventing you from overestimating your chances of success or failure. Another way to improve the accuracy of your predictions is to take an outside view. This means stepping back from your personal situation and considering the broader pattern of similar situations. For instance, instead of assuming that your personal experience will follow the exact trajectory of a few examples you've seen, think about how similar situations have played out in the past, using statistical data rather than just anecdotal evidence. Additionally, it helps to acknowledge and account for uncertainty. Being aware of how little you may know about a situation can lead to more cautious and balanced predictions. Instead of making bold claims about future outcomes, allow for the possibility of unforeseen events or fluctuations that can affect the results. Finally, refining your intuitive predictions requires practice. By becoming more aware of the biases that influence your decisions and actively incorporating statistical reasoning, you can improve the accuracy of your predictions over time. Recognizing when intuition might be leading you astray and when to slow down and engage in more deliberate thinking can lead to better, more informed judgments and decisions. Part 3, Overconfidence. 19. The illusion of understanding. The illusion of understanding is a cognitive bias where people believe they understand events or situations more clearly than they actually do. This bias leads individuals to feel confident in their knowledge, even when they lack a deep or accurate understanding of the subject at hand. In reality, our explanations of complex events are often oversimplified and based on limited information. One reason for this illusion is that human beings have a natural tendency to create coherent stories to make sense of the world. These stories help us organize and explain what we observe, even when those explanations are incomplete or flawed. For example, when someone is asked why a certain event happened, they might offer a detailed, convincing explanation, even though they only know a fraction of the relevant facts. The story they tell feels satisfying, so they believe it must be true, even if it's not entirely accurate. This bias is particularly evident in fields like history, economics, and politics, where complex events are often explained by oversimplified narratives. For instance, after a financial crisis, people might point to a specific cause or factor, such as the actions of one particular group or country, while ignoring the broader range of factors that contributed to the situation. These simplified explanations often make the situation feel more understandable and predictable, but they ignore the deeper, more complicated reality. The illusion of understanding can also affect how people assess their own abilities. Many individuals overestimate their understanding of certain topics or predict outcomes with excessive confidence. For example, a person might believe they can accurately predict the performance of a stock based on superficial knowledge of market trends, ignoring the fact that stock markets are influenced by countless unpredictable factors. This illusion is fueled by our tendency to overemphasize the coherence and plausibility of our explanations rather than questioning their accuracy. When we tell a convincing story, we become more confident in our understanding of the events, even if that story is incomplete or misleading. Recognizing the illusion of understanding is essential for making better decisions. By acknowledging the limits of your knowledge and being open to the complexity of situations, you can make more informed judgments. Instead of relying solely on simplified explanations, try to seek out more detailed, diverse perspectives and question the completeness of the stories you tell yourself. Understanding the limitations of your knowledge can help you avoid overconfidence and lead to more rational decision making. 20. The illusion of validity. The illusion of validity occurs when people believe that their judgments or predictions are more accurate than they actually are, especially when they are based on irrelevant or insufficient information. It is a cognitive bias where individuals overestimate the validity of their knowledge, often due to the coherence or perceived plausibility of the data they have, even if that data is actually unreliable. For instance, imagine a person who predicts that a certain stock will rise based on their analysis of the company's performance. They might use a set of data points, such as the company's earnings, the CEO's past record, and market trends that seem to support their prediction. However, this data may be incomplete or based on factors that have no significant impact on the company's future success. Despite this, they feel highly confident in their prediction because the data fits well together and seems convincing. This bias happens because when information is consistent or aligns with our expectations, we often assume that it must be valid or meaningful. The more we are exposed to consistent patterns or stories, the more convinced we become of their accuracy, even if those patterns are misleading or irrelevant. This is particularly problematic in fields like finance, medicine, or law, where decision-making is based on predictions or assessments, but the data available is often imperfect or ambiguous. The illusion of validity also leads people to place excessive trust in expert opinions. Experts can fall victim to this bias too, especially when they have accumulated experience or knowledge in a particular area. The longer someone has been practicing a profession, the more likely they are to trust their own judgments, even when the evidence is not as reliable as they think. In many cases, experts rely on patterns or data that seem to make sense, but those patterns may be coincidental or misleading. One of the key aspects of the illusion of validity is the confirmation bias, where people tend to notice and remember information that supports their beliefs and ignore information that contradicts them. When this happens, even flawed or incomplete data can seem valid, reinforcing the illusion of accuracy. To counter this bias, it's important to regularly question the validity of your judgments and predictions, especially when they are based on limited or incomplete information. Consider the possibility that your conclusions may be influenced by the illusion of validity, and seek out diverse perspectives or more objective data before making decisions. Recognizing that not all patterns are meaningful and that overconfidence can distort your judgment will help you make more accurate and rational decisions. 21. Intuitions versus formulas. When it comes to making decisions, people often rely on their intuition, the gut feeling or instinctive judgment they have about a situation. Intuition is shaped by personal experience and a sense of what feels right. However, research has shown that intuition is not always as reliable as people believe. In many cases, using statistical formulas or data driven approaches is a more accurate way of making predictions and decisions. Intuitive thinking is fast and automatic, often drawing on patterns or past experiences to make judgments quickly. This can be useful in situations where decisions need to be made rapidly. However, intuition is prone to errors, especially in complex situations or when the person's knowledge is limited or flawed. For example, an experienced doctor might rely on their intuition to diagnose a patient based on symptoms they've seen before, but this instinct can be misleading if the situation deviates from past cases. On the other hand, formulas, which are based on data, statistical models, and objective analysis, are often much more accurate than intuition, especially in situations where there are large amounts of information to process or when human judgment is susceptible to bias. Formulas are designed to account for various variables and weigh them according to their importance, leading to more consistent and reliable outcomes. In fields like medicine, finance, and sports, using formulas has proven to be more effective than relying on expert intuition. For instance, studies have shown that doctors who use decision making formulas to diagnose illnesses tend to make more accurate diagnoses than those who rely solely on their intuition. Similarly, in sports, statistical models can predict player performance or the outcome of a game more accurately than expert coaches or analysts who rely on their own judgment alone. Despite the advantages of formulas, people are often reluctant to trust them. Intuition feels more personal and comfortable, and there is a natural tendency to favor it over more analytical approaches. This is especially true when experts are involved, as people often place great confidence in their judgment. However, even experts can be prone to cognitive biases that lead to errors in judgment. To improve decision making, it's important to recognize when intuition may be leading you astray and to consider using formulas or statistical models, especially in complex situations. Formulas may feel less personal, but they offer a more objective, data driven approach that can improve the accuracy of your decisions. By combining intuition with the power of formulas, you can make better informed judgments that are grounded in evidence rather than flawed instincts. 22. Expert intuition. When can we trust it? Expert intuition is the ability of experienced individuals to make quick, accurate decisions based on their vast knowledge and experience in a particular field. While intuition is often considered unreliable, in certain situations, experts can develop the ability to make highly accurate judgments. The key question is, when can we trust expert intuition? And when should we be cautious about relying on it? For expert intuition to be trustworthy, it must be based on years of practice and exposure to relevant patterns and feedback. Experts often develop their intuitive skills through experience, which allows them to recognize subtle patterns that others might overlook. For example, a seasoned chess player can make quick, accurate moves based on their deep understanding of the game, while a novice might struggle to recognize the best moves. Similarly, an experienced firefighter might intuitively sense when a building is at risk of collapsing based on the sound or behavior of the fire, even though they can't articulate exactly why. However, expert intuition is not always reliable. It tends to be more effective in situations that are stable. where patterns repeat themselves and feedback is immediate and clear. In these conditions, experts can learn from experience, refine their judgments, and develop the ability to make quick, accurate decisions. In contrast, expert intuition can fail in situations that are novel, uncertain, or complex, where patterns are unclear and the feedback is delayed or ambiguous. For example, an expert stock trader might make poor predictions during times of financial crisis, when market behavior is unpredictable and doesn't follow historical trends. Another limitation of expert intuition is that it is often based on heuristics or mental shortcuts that can lead to biases. Experts are still susceptible to errors in judgment, such as overconfidence or the anchoring bias, where their initial assumptions unduly influence their decisions. These biases can cloud their judgment, even if they have extensive experience in their field. To determine when to trust expert intuition, it's important to assess the nature of the environment and the conditions in which the expert is operating. Expert intuition is most reliable in environments that are predictable, with clear patterns and frequent feedback. It's less reliable when the situation is unfamiliar or involves high uncertainty. For example, in medical diagnosis, a doctor might make a quick, accurate diagnosis based on years of experience, but the same doctor might struggle when presented with a rare condition they've never encountered before. To make better use of expert intuition, it's important for experts to be aware of their biases and the limitations of their experience. In situations where expert intuition might be unreliable, it's often better to supplement it with statistical models, data analysis, or input from other experts. By combining intuition with more objective, evidence-based approaches, experts can improve their decision-making and reduce the risk of errors. Ultimately, expert intuition is valuable, but it should be used cautiously and with an understanding of when it is most effective. Trusting expert intuition in the right situations can lead to quick, accurate decisions. But when the circumstances are uncertain or unfamiliar, it's best to seek additional information and consider alternative approaches. 23. The outside view. The outside view is a decision-making strategy that encourages you to look at situations from a broader, more objective perspective, rather than relying solely on your own experience or expectations. This approach involves considering the experiences and outcomes of similar situations, rather than focusing on the details of your specific case. It helps you avoid the biases that can distort your judgment, such as overconfidence or the tendency to believe that your situation is unique or different from others. When you take the outside view, you are essentially disengaging from your own perspective and instead focusing on how similar situations have turned out in the past. For example, if you're planning a new business, rather than basing your predictions on your own vision and expectations, the outside view suggests you should look at how other similar businesses have performed. By examining the statistical trends or typical outcomes of businesses in your industry, you get a more realistic and grounded view of your chances for success. This approach helps to combat the planning fallacy, where people tend to underestimate the time, costs, or risks involved in a project. The planning fallacy happens because people often focus too much on the specific details of their own plan and are overly optimistic about their ability to succeed. The outside view, however, relies on data from similar past projects, which tends to be more reliable than individual expectations. By using the outside view, you take into account the broader context, including the typical challenges and obstacles that others have faced. For example, if you are renovating a house, rather than just estimating how long it will take based on your personal project details, you would consider how long similar renovations typically take and how often they encounter unforeseen issues. This broader perspective helps to avoid underestimating timeframes or costs and can lead to more accurate predictions. The outside view also helps you avoid the focus illusion, which is the tendency to place too much emphasis on the information most readily available to you, such as the immediate details of your situation. By stepping back and considering the bigger picture, you can better assess the true likelihood of success or failure. The key to using the outside view effectively is gathering data about similar situations and recognizing patterns from past experiences, rather than relying solely on your own assumptions or personal history. While your specific situation may have unique elements, the outside view helps you acknowledge that many factors are shared with others, and these patterns can be very informative. By adopting the outside view, you are less likely to be swayed by your own biases, assumptions, or overly optimistic projections. Instead, you make decisions based on more objective and grounded insights, which increases the likelihood of more accurate predictions and better decision making. 24. The engine of capitalism. The engine of capitalism is driven by the fundamental belief that individuals, businesses, and markets can thrive through competition, profit, and innovation. In this environment, people are motivated to maximize their financial gains, and businesses strive to meet the demands of consumers while seeking to outperform their competitors. While this system has led to significant economic growth and technological advancements, it is also shaped by a number of biases and behaviors that influence the decisions of individuals and organizations. One of the key factors driving capitalism is the profit motive. People are motivated to earn money and build wealth, which incentivizes businesses to provide goods and services that consumers want and need. This competition between businesses leads to innovation as companies try to develop new products or improve existing ones to stay ahead of their rivals. It encourages efficiency as businesses seek to reduce costs and increase their profitability. However, the engine of capitalism also runs on risk taking. Entrepreneurs and investors take risks in the hope of achieving high returns. While some risk taking can lead to great rewards, it can also result in significant losses, especially when the risks are not carefully assessed. In many cases, people tend to overestimate their ability to predict outcomes, leading them to take risks that are disproportionate to the potential benefits. This overconfidence bias can lead to poor decisions and failures, especially when people fail to account for uncertainty and the complexity of the markets. Another driving force behind capitalism is optimism. People tend to believe that the future will be better than the present, and this optimistic outlook often leads to increased investment and spending. This positive outlook can drive economic expansion, but it can also result in overconfidence and the creation of bubbles, where assets become overvalued due to excessive optimism. When these bubbles burst, the economy can experience downturns and crashes. In addition, capitalism thrives on competition, which can be both beneficial and harmful. While competition encourages businesses to improve their products and services, it can also lead to unethical behavior as companies try to outdo one another. In the pursuit of profit, businesses may cut corners, engage in deceptive marketing practices, or exploit workers. This competitive drive can sometimes undermine the long-term sustainability of businesses or the economy as a whole. Capitalism also depends on consumer behavior. People's preferences, desires, and spending habits shape the market, driving demand for certain products and services. However, consumer behavior is often influenced by biases, such as the availability heuristic or anchoring effect, which can lead people to make purchasing decisions based on limited or irrelevant information. These biases can distort the way people perceive value, leading to suboptimal decisions that impact the broader market. Ultimately, the engine of capitalism is driven by a combination of motivation, competition, risk-taking, optimism, and consumer behavior. While these factors can create immense wealth and innovation, they are also influenced by biases and cognitive shortcuts that can lead to mistakes and inefficiencies. Recognizing these biases and understanding how they impact decision-making can help individuals and businesses make better choices, reducing the risks and improving the sustainability of the capitalist system. Part 4, Choices 25. Bernoulli's errors. Bernoulli's errors refer to a mistake in decision-making based on how people evaluate potential gains and losses. This error is tied to a misunderstanding of expected utility theory, which was proposed by mathematician Daniel Bernoulli. According to expected utility theory, people should make decisions based on the expected value or utility of different outcomes. However, in practice, people often deviate from this theory due to biases in how they perceive gains and losses. One of the core mistakes involved in Bernoulli's errors is that people tend to overweight small probabilities and underweight large ones. This means that individuals might make decisions that appear irrational, such as gambling on a very low probability event with a high reward, while undervaluing the more probable outcomes that offer less reward. In many cases, this can lead to risky choices and suboptimal decisions. For example, people may be willing to pay a large amount of money for the chance to win a lottery with extremely low odds, while ignoring the more predictable, safer investment opportunities that offer a guaranteed return. This tendency to give undue importance to small probabilities is a key element of Bernoulli's error. Additionally, Bernoulli's errors arise from the value function, which is a psychological model of how people evaluate gains and losses. According to this model, losses are psychologically more painful than gains are pleasurable, a concept known as loss aversion. This means that people are more motivated to avoid losses than to pursue gains, which can lead to overly cautious behavior, such as avoiding opportunities with potential losses even if they offer greater long-term rewards. For instance, someone may be hesitant to invest in a stock because of the potential for loss, even if the expected return is higher than the risk involved. On the other hand, they may take unnecessary risks in situations where they perceive the potential for a large gain, even if the odds of success are extremely low. These biases, such as overvaluing small probabilities and being overly cautious about losses, lead people to make decisions that deviate from rational economic behavior. Recognizing these errors can help individuals make better choices by being aware of the ways that their emotions and cognitive biases influence their decision making. In summary, Bernoulli's errors occur when people fail to make rational decisions based on expected utility theory, due to biases in how they assess probabilities, gains, and losses. Understanding these biases can lead to better decision making by helping people recognize when their choices are influenced by irrational perceptions. 26. Prospect theory. Prospect theory is a psychological model that describes how people make decisions involving risk and uncertainty. It was developed as an alternative to traditional economic theories, which assumed that people make decisions based solely on logical reasoning and the maximization of utility. Instead, prospect theory takes into account the biases and emotional reactions that often influence decision making. One of the key insights of prospect theory is that people do not evaluate outcomes in absolute terms, such as the final amount of money or resources they have. Instead, they evaluate changes relative to a reference point, which could be their current situation or expectations. This means that a gain of $100 feels better when you're starting with $500 than when you're starting with $5,000, even though the absolute gain is the same. The theory is based on two main principles: loss aversion and the value function. 1. Loss aversion. People are much more sensitive to losses than to gains of the same size. In other words, the pain of losing $100 is greater than the pleasure of gaining $100. This leads people to make decisions that are overly cautious, as they are more focused on avoiding losses than on pursuing gains. Loss aversion explains many behaviors, such as why people might hold on to losing investments or avoid taking risks, even when the potential rewards outweigh the risks. 2. The value function. The value function represents how people value gains and losses. It is steeper for losses than for gains, meaning that people are more sensitive to losses than to gains. As a result, people tend to overreact to potential losses. The curve of the value function is also concave for gains and convex for losses, indicating that the subjective value of a gain decreases as it increases, while the subjective value of a loss increases more sharply as it becomes larger. Additionally, prospect theory suggests that people often make decisions based on certainty effect and probability weighting. Certainty effect. People tend to overvalue outcomes that are certain and undervalue those that are probable but uncertain. For example, people may prefer a guaranteed $50 over a 50% chance of winning $100, even though the expected value of the gamble is higher. This is due to the disproportionate weight placed on the certainty of the outcome. Probability weighting. People tend to overweight small probabilities and underweight large probabilities. This explains why people might buy lottery tickets despite the extremely low chance of winning, or why they may overestimate the likelihood of rare events occurring. Prospect theory has important implications for understanding human behavior in areas such as economics, finance, and decision making. It explains why people often make decisions that seem irrational or inconsistent with traditional economic theory. For example, it helps explain why people might be unwilling to sell a losing stock, even when it's clear that doing so would minimize their losses, or why they may take excessive risks in hopes of making a big gain. In summary, prospect theory provides a more accurate description of how people make decisions in situations involving risk. It highlights the importance of psychological factors like loss aversion, the value function, and probability weighting in shaping decisions, and it challenges traditional economic assumptions about human behavior. By understanding prospect theory, individuals can become more aware of their biases and make more informed decisions. 27. The endowment effect. The endowment effect is a psychological phenomenon where people tend to overvalue things they own simply because they own them. This bias leads individuals to assign higher value to their possessions than they would if they did not own them. Essentially, people place a greater worth on what they have, even if there is no objective reason to do so. For example, if you were to receive a mug as a gift, you might value it at $5, but if you were asked to sell it, you might not be willing to part with it for less than $10, even though there's no reason the mug has gained any inherent value. The endowment effect causes you to feel a sense of ownership over the object, which makes it feel more valuable to you than it would to someone else. This effect occurs because of loss aversion, a concept that is central to prospect theory. When you own something, the thought of losing it feels worse than the potential gain from acquiring it. People's emotional attachment to their possessions causes them to irrationally inflate their value in their minds. The endowment effect can influence various areas of life, from simple consumer decisions to more significant financial choices, such as selling assets or negotiating deals. The endowment effect also explains why individuals tend to hold on to items for longer than they should, even when it would be more rational to sell or discard them. In the context of decision making, this effect can lead to suboptimal choices, as people might overprice their possessions or refuse to part with them even when better opportunities arise. An interesting example of the endowment effect can be seen in studies involving sports tickets. Participants who were given tickets to a popular event were typically unwilling to sell them for a price that was much lower than what others were willing to pay to buy them. This happens because they feel a stronger connection to the tickets as their own property, and they see selling them as a potential loss, even if the price they're being offered is fair. The endowment effect is particularly important to consider in economic transactions and negotiations. It highlights how personal attachment to possessions can lead to distorted decision making. By recognizing the endowment effect, individuals can avoid letting emotional attachment cloud their judgment and make more objective decisions. It also serves as a reminder that ownership can lead to biases in how we perceive value, ultimately influencing our choices in ways that may not align with rational thinking. 28. Bad events. Bad events have a disproportionate impact on our thinking and decision making, which is a core idea in psychology. People tend to give more weight to negative experiences, outcomes, or information than to positive ones. This bias, known as negativity bias, leads individuals to focus on and react more strongly to negative events, often overestimating their significance compared to positive events of equal magnitude. For example, if you experience a small setback at work, like missing a deadline, you might feel discouraged and think about it much more intensely than a similar positive event, such as completing a project ahead of time. This negative focus can lead to excessive worry, stress, and even irrational decision making, as you become more motivated to avoid bad outcomes than to pursue good ones. The tendency to focus on bad events is rooted in our evolutionary history. In the past, paying more attention to negative events, such as potential threats or dangers, would have increased survival chances. The brain's heightened sensitivity to negative stimuli helped people respond quickly to avoid risks and harm. However, in the modern world, this tendency to overemphasize negative events can lead to distorted thinking and hinder our ability to maintain a balanced perspective. This bias can manifest in various aspects of life, such as when people react more strongly to negative feedback than to praise, or when they dwell on past mistakes while underestimating their successes. This emotional response to bad events can also affect decision making, as people may take unnecessary precautions or avoid risks altogether out of fear of failure or loss. For example, someone who has experienced a business failure might be overly cautious in future ventures, even if the potential for success is high. Furthermore, the impact of bad events can be amplified by loss aversion, a concept from prospect theory. The pain of losing something, whether it's money, time, or an opportunity, feels more intense than the pleasure of gaining something of equal value. This means that individuals are often more motivated to avoid losses than to seek out gains, which can lead to risk averse behavior, missed opportunities, and poor decision making. The focus on bad events also affects how people perceive and respond to news or media. Negative headlines, such as disasters or crises, often receive more attention and coverage than positive stories. This media effect can skew perceptions of the world, making it seem more dangerous or negative than it actually is. Recognizing the influence of bad events on our thinking can help counteract the bias they create. By consciously acknowledging and seeking out positive experiences, we can achieve a more balanced perspective. It's important to understand that while bad events can be impactful, they don't necessarily reflect the overall reality of a situation. Focusing too much on negative experiences can lead to unnecessary stress and poor decisions. Shifting the focus to the positive and adopting a more balanced outlook can improve decision making and emotional well being. 29. The fourfold pattern. The fourfold pattern is a concept in decision making that describes how people react differently to gains and losses depending on the probabilities involved. It is a pattern of choices that reflects how people evaluate risky situations, especially in the context of prospect theory. The pattern illustrates how people behave when faced with different combinations of potential gains and losses, and how they make decisions based on perceived risks and rewards. The fourfold pattern divides decision making into four distinct categories based on two factors: the magnitude of gain or loss and the probability of achieving that outcome. These four categories are: 1. High probability of a small gain. People tend to prefer a sure gain in this scenario. When the chance of receiving a small reward is high, individuals are likely to choose the guaranteed outcome, as they are risk averse when it comes to gains. This is consistent with the certainty effect, where people prefer certainty over a gamble, even if the expected value is the same. 2. High probability of a large loss. In situations where the probability of experiencing a large loss is high, people tend to avoid the loss and are willing to take more risks to prevent it. This is driven by loss aversion, where people are more motivated to avoid losses than to secure equivalent gains. In this scenario, they may take unnecessary risks to avoid the negative outcome, which can sometimes lead to irrational decision making. 3. Low probability of a small gain. In this situation, people tend to gamble for a larger gain, even though the probability of success is low. They are drawn to the possibility of a large reward despite the low likelihood of it happening. This behavior reflects overweighting small probabilities, a key feature of prospect theory. People may place an irrationally high value on the small chance of a large gain, which can lead to risky behavior such as buying lottery tickets or making high-risk investments. 4. Low probability of a large loss. When faced with a low probability of a large loss, people tend to take the risk and are often willing to accept the potential loss in exchange for the possibility of avoiding it. The decision to take the risk reflects a combination of optimism and risk-seeking behavior. People often feel that the likelihood of the large loss occurring is so low that they are willing to gamble on the chance of avoiding it, even though the potential consequences of failure are severe. The fourfold pattern illustrates how our decision making is influenced by the probability and size of potential gains or losses. It shows that people are not always rational in their choices, especially when it comes to assessing risk. The pattern highlights the complex relationship between risk aversion, loss aversion, and the way people evaluate potential outcomes, often leading to decisions that defy logical reasoning. Understanding the fourfold pattern can help individuals recognize when they are making irrational choices due to biases like loss aversion or probability weighting. By becoming more aware of these tendencies, people can improve their decision making and reduce the influence of these cognitive biases in situations involving risk and uncertainty. 30. Rare events. Rare events refer to occurrences that have a very low probability but are often perceived as much more likely than they actually are. These events tend to attract significant attention, especially when they are dramatic or unexpected. The way people think about and react to rare events is influenced by cognitive biases, particularly availability bias and probability misjudgment. Humans are wired to be more sensitive to extraordinary events such as natural disasters, terrorist attacks, or financial crashes. Because these events are often highly publicized, they become more easily accessible in our memory. The availability heuristic leads people to overestimate the likelihood of rare events occurring simply because they are memorable or emotionally impactful. When these events are vividly portrayed in the media, they seem more common than they are in reality. For instance, if a plane crash is widely reported in the news, people may develop an irrational fear of flying, even though the statistical probability of a crash is extremely low. Similarly, after a large scale natural disaster, such as a hurricane or earthquake, people might overestimate the risk of such an event happening again, even though these events are rare and the chances of experiencing one in a given area remain low. The overestimation of rare events can lead to poor decision making and risk averse behavior. People may avoid flying, invest in expensive insurance policies, or take unnecessary precautions based on the exaggerated perception of risk. This behavior is driven by the emotional weight of the event, which clouds rational judgment. The impact bias, which is the tendency to overestimate the emotional impact of rare events, further amplifies this irrational thinking. On the other hand, rare events can also lead to underestimation of risk in some situations. If people are not frequently exposed to rare negative events, they may fail to adequately prepare for them. For example, if someone has never experienced a natural disaster, they may underestimate the potential impact of one, assuming it will never happen to them. In financial decision making, rare events can also have significant effects. Investors may overreact to rare market crashes or economic crises, making them overly cautious or causing them to panic and sell off assets. Alternatively, they may be overly optimistic about rare opportunities, such as speculative investments that promise huge returns but have very low chances of success. Understanding the impact of rare events and recognizing how cognitive biases influence our perceptions can help individuals make better, more informed decisions. It's important to consider the statistical likelihood of rare events and differentiate between actual risk and perceived risk. By doing so, people can avoid making irrational decisions based on rare but emotionally charged events. This approach can lead to more balanced and rational decision making, especially in high stakes situations. 31. Risk policies. Risk policies are strategies or guidelines designed to manage and mitigate risks in various situations, whether in personal life, business, or investments. These policies are based on the understanding that risks are inherent in almost every decision, and a structured approach can help reduce the impact of negative outcomes while maximizing the potential for positive results. The creation of a risk policy involves setting clear rules and guidelines for decision making, especially in uncertain or high stakes situations. A well established risk policy helps individuals and organizations avoid reactive, emotionally driven decisions and instead encourages more rational, consistent, and informed choices. Key elements of risk policies. 1. Risk tolerance. One of the foundational aspects of any risk policy is determining risk tolerance, which refers to the level of risk an individual or organization is willing to accept in pursuit of a goal. Risk tolerance can vary widely depending on factors such as the nature of the activity, the potential for loss, and the individual's or organization's resources and goals. Understanding risk tolerance helps guide decisions and ensures that risk-taking aligns with overall objectives. 2. Diversification. In the context of financial investments, a common risk policy is diversification, spreading investments across different assets or sectors to reduce exposure to any single risk. The idea behind diversification is that even if one investment fails, others might succeed, minimizing overall risk. This principle can also apply in non financial contexts, such as diversifying strategies in business or personal life to spread out potential risks. 3. Risk aversion versus risk seeking. Risk policies help identify whether an individual or organization is risk averse, preferring to avoid risks, or risk seeking, willing to take on more risks for potentially higher rewards. A well designed risk policy takes into account the natural biases toward loss aversion or excessive optimism, ensuring that decisions are made based on realistic assessments of risk rather than emotional reactions. 4. Risk assessment and monitoring. A good risk policy involves continuously assessing and monitoring risks. This means regularly evaluating potential threats or opportunities and updating strategies accordingly. Risk assessment helps ensure that decisions are based on current, accurate information, and ongoing monitoring ensures that risks are managed proactively. 5. Mitigation strategies. Risk policies include strategies to mitigate potential risks. This can involve setting limits, creating contingency plans, or purchasing insurance. Mitigation strategies focus on reducing the likelihood of negative outcomes or minimizing their impact if they do occur. 6. Decision frameworks. Risk policies often provide structured decision making frameworks, which guide how decisions are made when confronted with uncertainty. These frameworks may involve considering the possible outcomes, evaluating probabilities, and weighing the potential rewards against the risks involved. 7. Consistency and discipline. A crucial element of risk policies is ensuring consistency in decision making. Rather than relying on short term emotions or impulses, a well established policy helps individuals and organizations maintain discipline, stick to their long term objectives, and avoid rash decisions driven by temporary circumstances. Risk policies in practice. In business, companies often adopt risk policies to manage everything from financial investments to supply chain risks. These policies may include setting upper limits on the amount of risk exposure a company is willing to accept, or creating specific protocols for how to respond to unexpected market changes or product failures. In personal life, individuals may apply risk policies in areas such as investing, health, or career choices. For example, someone might decide to invest only a certain percentage of their savings in high risk stocks, or they might establish a plan for dealing with health risks by engaging in regular exercise and preventive medical care. In financial investments, in investing, risk policies often define the ratio of assets to be allocated to different types of investments, e.g., stocks, bonds, real estate. They help an investor decide how to balance the risk reward equation, whether through diversification, hedging strategies, or a conservative approach to risk. The role of cognitive biases in risk policies. Cognitive biases, such as loss aversion or the availability heuristic, can significantly influence how risks are perceived and managed. For example, loss aversion can lead to an unwillingness to accept potential losses, even when the potential for gains outweighs them. A solid risk policy helps counteract these biases by encouraging rational decision making based on probabilities and long term objectives rather than emotional responses. In conclusion, risk policies are essential tools for managing uncertainty and making informed decisions. By establishing clear guidelines for handling risks, individuals and organizations can avoid reactive decisions driven by emotional responses to fear or greed. Well crafted risk policies provide structure, consistency, and discipline, helping people navigate the complexities of life, business, and investments with greater confidence and clarity. 32. Keeping score. Keeping score is the mental habit of tracking gains and losses, often without being consciously aware of it. People tend to measure their experiences in terms of what they've gained or lost, which can affect their decisions in personal relationships, investments, or even everyday activities. This automatic tallying of positive and negative events can distort perceptions, leading to irrational choices and biased judgment. Key points. 1. Loss aversion. People feel the pain of losses more acutely than the pleasure of equivalent gains. This tendency to focus on losses can cause individuals to make decisions based on recovering past losses rather than rationally assessing future opportunities. For instance, a person may dwell on a financial loss and become overly cautious in future investments, focusing on getting back what they lost. Sunk cost fallacy. The sunk cost fallacy occurs when people continue investing time, money, or effort into something based on past investments, even when it no longer makes sense to do so. For example, continuing to watch a movie that's not enjoyable simply because you've already watched a part of it is driven by the need to justify previous choices. This bias keeps people from cutting their losses and moving on. 3. Social dynamics and relationships. In relationships, people often keep score by mentally tallying favors, sacrifices, or grievances. This can lead to resentment if one person feels they are giving more than the other. When people focus on keeping track of actions or gifts, it may lead to unhealthy competition rather than fostering cooperation, mutual respect, and understanding. 4. Short-term focus over long-term goals. Keeping score often causes individuals to focus on immediate wins or losses instead of thinking about long-term objectives. This leads to impulsive decisions that prioritize short-term outcomes, such as selling off an investment after a brief loss, rather than holding on for potential future gains. Overcoming keeping score. 1. Recognize the bias. Becoming aware of the tendency to keep score is the first step toward making more rational, informed decisions. Understanding that this mental habit can distort judgment helps individuals pause and reconsider their choices. 2. Focus on long-term goals. By shifting focus from short-term gains or losses, people can make decisions that align with their broader long-term objectives. This can help avoid emotionally driven choices based on immediate circumstances. 3. Let go of past grievances. In relationships, it's important to stop keeping track of favors or past wrongs. Instead, focusing on mutual cooperation and building a positive future together can lead to healthier, more satisfying interactions. In summary, while keeping score may feel like a natural way to evaluate experiences, it often leads to biased, irrational decision making. By recognizing this tendency and taking steps to focus on long-term goals and balance, individuals can make better choices and reduce the negative impact of this habit on their relationships and decision-making processes. 33. Reversals. When you face a decision, the way it's presented can completely change how you choose, even if the situation is the same. This is what's known as a reversal. It happens when the framing of a problem shifts, and as a result, your decision can swing in the opposite direction. Even if the facts don't change, your mind reacts differently depending on how the problem is framed. For example, you might be given a choice between two options, one with a 90% chance of survival and another with a 10% chance of failure. If the information is presented as 90% chance of survival, you may feel more comfortable with the option, but if it's framed as 10% chance of failure, the same numbers might cause you to hesitate or choose a different path. The outcome is the same, but the way the options are presented leads you to make a different decision. This kind of reversal also shows up when you're faced with risk. When there's a potential loss, you may become risk-seeking. If you're offered the choice of losing $100 for sure or taking a gamble with a 50% chance of losing $200, you might take the gamble, even though it's riskier. However, when the same scenario is framed in terms of possible gains, you might become more cautious, preferring the guaranteed smaller gain over the risky option. It's the same situation, but how it's framed makes you choose differently. In everyday life, reversals can influence all kinds of decisions, from what to buy to how to manage finances. You might choose a risky investment when it's framed as a potential gain, but opt for something safer when it's framed as avoiding a loss. The way choices are framed can stir up emotions, leading you to make decisions that aren't always consistent with what's best for you. Context matters a lot too. The same product can feel more appealing if it's presented as being 30% off than if it's just listed at its regular price. Even though the price hasn't changed, the discount makes it seem like a better deal. Being aware of reversals can help you avoid making decisions based on how something is framed rather than what's truly best for you. It's important to take a moment to step back, Evaluate the situation without the emotional pull of how it's presented and focus on the long term impact rather than short term feelings. Consistently applying the same decision making process, regardless of how things are framed, can help you make more rational and consistent choices. 34. Frames and reality. The way you perceive the world and make decisions is often influenced by the way situations are framed. A frame is essentially the perspective or lens through which a set of facts or circumstances is presented. It's not just the facts themselves that influence you, but how those facts are introduced or interpreted. The way something is framed can deeply impact your emotional response and lead to choices that might not align with your best interests. For instance, imagine you're offered two different descriptions of the same medical treatment. One description says the treatment has a 90% survival rate, while the other says it has a 10% mortality rate. Despite both statements describing the exact same statistical reality, the way they are framed leads you to interpret them differently. The first description, focusing on survival, presents the treatment in a positive light, making you more likely to accept it. The second description, focusing on mortality, might make you more hesitant to choose the same treatment, even though the actual risks and benefits are identical. This difference in response is the result of the framing effect, where the same fact can trigger a completely different emotional reaction depending on how it's presented. The impact of framing isn't limited to medical decisions, it influences how you view almost everything in life. Take, for example, how the media covers events. If a company's earnings report is framed as record profits, you may view the company as successful and thriving. But if the same company's performance is framed as just meeting analyst expectations, you may perceive it as underperforming, even though both statements might refer to the same numbers. In both cases, the facts are unchanged, but the way they are framed leads you to a different interpretation. Frames can also significantly alter how you approach risks. For example, you might be presented with a choice between two options, one that offers a 50% chance of winning $100 and another that offers a 50% chance of losing $50. If the situation is framed in terms of potential loss, you might be more inclined to avoid the risk altogether, even though the probabilities and potential outcomes are the same. However, if the situation is framed in terms of potential gain, you might be more willing to take the risk. Frames can also evoke strong emotions that lead you to make decisions that aren't rational. If you're told a product is on sale for 30% off, the discount might make it seem like a better deal, even if the original price was inflated. This emotional trigger can cause you to make purchases based on the framing of the offer, rather than a careful evaluation of whether the product is really worth the price. The power of frames in shaping your decisions is vast, but understanding how they work can help you make better, more rational choices. When you recognize that frames are influencing your thinking, you can step back and question whether the way a situation is framed is affecting your judgment. By focusing on the actual facts and outcomes, rather than getting caught up in the emotional response triggered by the frame, you can make decisions that are more aligned with your true interests and goals. In conclusion, frames shape how we interpret reality, often without us even realizing it. The key to making better decisions lies in being aware of the frames that influence us and learning to look beyond them to assess the true facts. This awareness can lead to more objective, well informed choices, free from the biases introduced by different perspectives or framings of a situation. Part 5, Two Selves. 35. Two Selves. You experience life through two distinct selves, the experiencing self and the remembering self. The experiencing self lives in the present, feeling and reacting to everything that happens moment by moment. It's the part of you that enjoys or suffers through events as they unfold. On the other hand, the remembering self looks back on those moments and forms a story about them, remembering the highlights and how things ended. This self is more focused on the overall picture of past events rather than the nuances of how things felt in the moment. These two selves often have different perspectives on the same experience. While the experiencing self is concerned with the present moment, whether you're happy, sad, or content, the remembering self focuses on the totality of an experience, particularly how it ended. For instance, imagine you're on a vacation. While you're there, your experiencing self is enjoying the fun moments, but the remembering self will pay more attention to the overall satisfaction of the trip and how it ended. If your vacation ended on a positive note, even if there were some frustrations along the way, your remembering self may overshadow the negative moments, and you'll look back on the trip more fondly. This difference between the experiencing and remembering selves influences your decisions. Often, the remembering self has more power over your choices than the experiencing self. When reflecting on past events, the remembering self tends to focus on the highs and lows, especially the conclusion, and forms a memory based on that. The duration of the experience or the less exciting moments may be forgotten or minimized in comparison to the peak or the ending. For example, if you had a vacation where the first few days were stressful, but the trip ended with a beautiful experience, your remembering self would likely focus on that ending, making you recall the entire trip as enjoyable. Even though your experiencing self might have spent more time dealing with frustration, the memory of the peak experience overshadows the rest, and the remembering self influences your future decisions, like planning another vacation. This difference between the two selves explains why you might make decisions that seem irrational. You might choose to endure something uncomfortable, like finishing a long movie you're not enjoying, because you know your remembering self will feel a sense of accomplishment once it's done. Alternatively, you might avoid something that could be enjoyable in the moment, like a small adventure, because you anticipate a negative outcome that would be more strongly remembered by your remembering self. Recognizing how the two selves work can help you make choices that focus more on the present experience rather than on how it will be remembered later. 36. Life as a story. You tend to think of your life as a story with a beginning, middle, and end. This story is shaped by the way you remember your experiences, particularly the peaks and the endings, rather than the details of every moment. You're drawn to the narrative arc of your life, which gives you a sense of coherence and meaning. The stories you tell about yourself and your experiences are often constructed in a way that makes sense of events, even if that means ignoring or downplaying the parts that don't fit neatly into the narrative. The structure of a story is important because it allows you to make sense of complex experiences. You remember the highs, those moments that stand out as significant, and the lows, which leave a strong emotional impression. But the middle part of your life, where things are more routine or uneventful, is often glossed over or forgotten. This focus on the beginning and end of a story means you don't always remember the full complexity of your experiences, only those moments that stand out as either particularly good or particularly bad. The way you view your life as a story influences your decisions and actions. You often seek to shape your life into a coherent narrative that makes sense when you reflect on it. For example, you might make certain choices based on the kind of story you want to tell about yourself. If you want your life story to be about adventure and excitement, you may actively seek out new experiences that align with that narrative, even if they aren't necessarily the best choices for your well being. Alternatively, if you want your life to be about stability and security, you may make safer, more predictable decisions. This storytelling aspect of life also explains why you often look back at past events with a sense of meaning and closure. You interpret experiences in a way that fits the story you want to tell, even if the events themselves weren't as straightforward or clear cut. The remembering self plays a big role in this process, filtering out unimportant details and highlighting those that fit the narrative. For instance, you might focus on a particular achievement or failure, shaping it into a key turning point in your life story, even if that event wasn't as significant at the time as it appears in hindsight. The concept of life as a story also influences how you evaluate your happiness. If your life feels like a compelling, satisfying story with a clear plot and resolution, you're more likely to feel fulfilled, even if not every moment was perfect. You may also be more likely to forgive yourself for mistakes as you frame them as part of a larger narrative of growth or learning. Ultimately, thinking of your life as a story helps you make sense of the complexities of existence. However, It can also lead you to overlook or distort certain aspects of reality in order to fit events into a more coherent and satisfying narrative. Recognizing the role of storytelling in shaping your view of life can help you become more aware of how your memories and interpretations influence your decisions and understanding of the world. 37. Experienced well being. Experienced well being refers to how you feel in the present moment, how happy, content, or satisfied you are as you go through life's experiences. It's about the quality of your daily life and the emotions you experience in real time. Unlike remembered well being, which is shaped by your reflections and memories, experienced well being focuses on the actual feelings you have as you live through each moment. When you think about well being, you might picture an overall sense of happiness or satisfaction with life. But experienced well being is different. It's more about the moment to moment feelings you have. For example, you could be reflecting on a vacation and feel good about it in hindsight, but during the trip, you might have spent more time dealing with small annoyances or discomforts. Your overall sense of well being in the present moment might have been much lower than what you remember later on. Your day to day happiness or discomfort is influenced by many factors, such as your environment, your relationships, and your health. Positive emotions like joy, excitement, and love contribute to your experienced well being, while negative emotions such as stress, frustration, and sadness can diminish it. However, your focus often shifts more toward the big picture or your long term goals, which may cause you to overlook or underappreciate the smaller moments of well being in your daily life. One key to enhancing your experienced well being is to be mindful and aware of how you feel in the present. Instead of focusing solely on achievements or future goals, it's important to recognize and appreciate the good moments in life as they happen. By paying attention to your feelings in real time, you can improve your overall sense of happiness and satisfaction, even in the midst of daily challenges. Interestingly, your experiencing self, which is focused on the present, plays a significant role in determining your well being. Yet, many people tend to prioritize their remembering self, which is more focused on life's major milestones and achievements. This can lead to a disconnect between how you experience your life moment by moment and how you remember it later. Focusing more on your experienced well being encourages you to live more fully in the present, appreciating the simple pleasures and small moments of happiness that come along the way. In essence, experienced well being is about understanding and embracing the feelings you experience in real time. It's a valuable perspective that emphasizes living fully in the moment and finding joy and satisfaction in the everyday experiences that shape your life. 38. Thinking about life. Thinking about life is an essential part of being human. It involves reflecting on your past, considering your present situation, and thinking about your future. This process helps you make sense of the world, guide your actions, and shape your decisions. The way you think about your life can deeply influence how satisfied or fulfilled you feel. When you reflect on life, you tend to focus on the narrative you've created for yourself, the story of who you are and how you've gotten to where you are now. This story is shaped by your experiences, memories, and the meanings you attach to those experiences. It's not just a passive process, but an active one where you interpret the events of your life, draw conclusions, and create a personal narrative that makes sense to you. Sometimes this reflection leads to positive feelings of accomplishment, pride, or contentment. At other times, it can lead to feelings of regret, dissatisfaction, or worry about the future. How you think about your life can also impact your overall well being. For example, if you have a tendency to focus on the challenges or difficulties you've faced, you might feel more stress or frustration. On the other hand, if you focus on your achievements, growth, and positive moments, you're more likely to feel a sense of gratitude or fulfillment. The way you frame your life influences your emotional state and your approach to the future. This thinking process also includes how you plan for your future. When thinking about what lies ahead, you often make decisions based on your beliefs about what will bring you happiness or success. However, this future thinking can sometimes be flawed. You may overestimate or underestimate how much a particular outcome will impact your happiness or You may focus too much on distant goals without considering the small daily moments that contribute to your well being. This bias in thinking can lead to decisions that don't necessarily align with your true desires or happiness. Thinking about life also means dealing with the uncertainty of what lies ahead. The future is unpredictable, and sometimes this uncertainty can lead to anxiety or indecision. However, thinking about life can also involve embracing the unknown and being open to new experiences. Accepting that not everything is within your control allows you to let go of the need for certainty and focus more on living in the present. Ultimately, the way you think about life is a powerful force in shaping your happiness and sense of fulfillment. Whether you're reflecting on the past, considering the present, or planning for the future, your thoughts about life play a significant role in your emotional well being. By cultivating a more mindful, balanced approach to how you think about your life, you can better navigate the complexities of existence and find greater peace and contentment in the process. The ideas explored in this book offer a deep understanding of the ways you think, decide, and perceive the world around you. By recognizing how your mind works through two systems, the fast, intuitive one and the slow, deliberate one, you gain insight into the mental shortcuts, biases, and patterns that shape your judgments. This awareness can empower you to make more informed, conscious decisions, especially in situations where quick thinking might lead to errors. Understanding the differences between the experiencing self and the remembering self helps you realize how your memories and perceptions influence your overall satisfaction and well being. You begin to see how your life's story, shaped by the peaks and endings, isn't always an accurate reflection of your daily experiences. By focusing on the present moment and becoming more mindful of your true feelings, you can improve your experienced well being. The book also sheds light on the influence of heuristics and biases in your decision making. Knowing that you are prone to cognitive shortcuts and errors, you can take steps to counteract them, whether it's by slowing down to engage more thoughtful reasoning or by challenging your assumptions. Recognizing these biases in yourself and others can lead to better choices in your personal and professional life. By incorporating these insights, you can make decisions that align more closely with your true values, reduce errors in judgment, and approach life with a deeper understanding of how your mind works. Whether it's managing risk, improving decision making, or enhancing your overall happiness, these concepts provide practical tools for navigating the complexities of life.
Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you taking the time to join me. If you found the video helpful, please like, subscribe, and share it with others. I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to leave a comment.